It is now my pleasure to introduce Jacqueline Woodson, author of Red at the Bone and many others. Jacqueline Woodson is the best-selling author of more than 24 award-winning books, including the 2016 New York Times bestselling National Book Award finalist for adult fiction, Another Brooklyn. Among her many accolades, Woodson is a 4-time National Book Award finalist, 4-time Newbery Honor winner, a 2-time NAACP Image Award winner, and a 2-time Coretta Scott King Award winner. That's a mouthful, and I don't think she's done. She lives with her family in New York. Red at the Bone, infused with her signature insight and rich poetic prose, opens in 2001 in Brooklyn. The occasion is Melody's coming-of-age ceremony. Charting the course of 2 families from different classes, Woodson's affecting narrative tackles identity, ambition, desire, and parenthood, as well as exploring how the decisions young people make change generations to come. Tayari Jones is quoted as saying, "Woodson brings the readers so close to her young characters that you can smell the bubble gum on their breath and feel their lips as they brush against your ear." Woodson will be in conversation with Lynn Neary, longtime NPR arts correspondent. That said, please join me in warmly welcoming Jacqueline Woodson and Lynn Neary to Politics and Prose.
Hello. So I'm going to read a short bit from chapter 2 of Red at the Bone, which is told from alternating points of view. And this is Aubrey, the father of Melody, who's having her coming-of-age ceremony. Can everyone hear me? Okay. His daughter was descending the stairs. As the orchestra his in-laws had paid for played, she was taking each step as though the world had stopped for her, as though this moment were the only moment on earth with her in it. And she was fine as hell, this girl. No, this woman, this seed of his, this cry into the night, this apology of a child. "Iris, I didn't mean to. Damn, I'm so sorry." When had it happened? Her with so much of Iris, the cheekbones, the slant of the eyes, the smile with so much. What was that thing behind their smiles? Some long-held secret about you. Both of them knowing you, knowing what you'd been up to, as though they could see, taste, and smell it on you. Aubrey had seen that smile so many times over the past 16 years. Where were the years? And still, this moment with Melody walking toward them and this whack-ass rendering of Prince filling the house. Aubrey leaned back against the wall. His hands felt unsure suddenly. Iris had pressed hers to her mouth. But what is the father of the child supposed to do with his hands? His big open hands, where were they supposed to go when all they wanted to do was reach out for his child, hug her, hide her from the world? These hands that had learned at 17 how to snatch smelly diapers away from her tiny body, rub A&D ointment over her rashed behind, hold her until the singing stopped, until the crying stopped, hold her over his shoulder with his massive hand behind her fragile head, then on his chest, in his lap, in his arms, on his back, both shoulders, his hand on her shoulder as she scooted too fast away from him. Who was this now, descending the stairs? This child he made and raised and loved. God, how he loved every single cell dividing. The coarseness of her hair, the deep vulnerable hollow in her neck, the half moons beneath her nails. Those show how many boyfriends you're gonna have. Watch out, world. And her tears when they began to fade. Does that mean no one's ever going to love me, Daddy? His baby girl was coming down those stairs, and he was crying now, outright and silently, and no one had told him what to do with his hands. As he slid them into his pockets, Iris shot him a look. He pulled them out again, quickly wiped at his eyes, clasped behind him, against the wall, arms raised, fingers laced on top of his head, arms folded. What was the right thing? How come he never knew the right thing to do? Thank you.
Hi, Jackie.
Hey, Lynn.
So you have an incredible career, a long career writing literature for young people. I don't know if everybody knows this, but Jacqueline is the National Ambassador for Young People's Literature, and I think your tenure is coming to a close on that one. You also won the National Book Award for Young People's Literature for Brown Girl Dreaming, your memoir. And but your last book, Another Brooklyn, and this one are written for adults. So first of all, what made you want to make that shift?
So actually, between Another Brooklyn and Red at the Bone, I wrote a middle grade book, Harbor Me, and a picture book, The Day You Begin.
This woman is very prolific.
So I feel like I wanted to. I like all the worlds. Like, I like writing for young people. I like writing picture books because it feels like I'm writing poetry. I like writing middle grade because I like the voice of 10, 11, 12-year-olds. And I like the gaze that adult literature allows me, the way I can kind of stand back and look at it from all these different perspectives. And also the way I can play with time and the way I can move characters along the age brackets, right? And with middle grade fiction, and with picture books, the characters tend to stay at one age, right? The person telling the story is 10 or 11. With adult books, like with Another Brooklyn, the main character, August, is in her 30s, but she's talking about a time when she was 15. But it's an adult perspective because she's in her 30s. So I just like all the worlds.
Well, I think I see a connection between Brown Girl Dreaming and these books for adults, Another Brooklyn and Red at the Bone. They're really all stories about young girls from Brooklyn. And you, of course, were a young girl from Brooklyn yourself. Why do you want to keep returning to that territory? What are you mining in that place and those kinds of girls?
The thing about Brooklyn is you can write about it forever and it's never going to be the same place. It's constantly changing. So if I'm writing about the Brooklyn of the 70s, it's different than the Brooklyn of the 80s, which is different than the Brooklyn of the 90s and now. Looking at some place like what I write about in Bushwick and Another Brooklyn, I wrote that book because I wanted to explore the Columbusing of a neighborhood, right? Here was this neighborhood that had been when I was growing up in it, Black and Latino people and white people moving away. So it's a neighborhood of white flight. And then as at this point in time, it's now the hipster neighborhood and white folks are moving back into it. And so I'm writing about the same space, but it's very different. And that's what's interesting to me about New York in general and Brooklyn in particular, that you can write about a specific place at a specific time and then write about it again 10 years later and it be a completely different place. And the people in it are different. So when you look at Sylvia, Angela, Gigi, and August in Another Brooklyn, they're very different than Melody in Red at the Bone, even though they're all Black girls growing up in Brooklyn.
Yeah.
So I can explore all of these different identities and know something deep about them and then have all this information that not have all this information and know like nothing at all about some parts of their lives.
Well, there's really two young girls in this book because we meet Melody at the same age that we really meet her mother at for the first time. Her mother's 15 when she becomes pregnant with Melody. Against her parents' wishes, she decides to keep the baby, and everything reverberates out from that point, really. And we see how that affects everybody in the family, and we learn so much about them going back in their history and then moving forward and into the present. Why did you want to begin with that a 15-year-old girl getting pregnant and making the decision she made to keep the baby?
So it's interesting. It actually, I feel like Red at the Bone begins with the Tulsa Race Massacre, right?
It does.
So and then the other beginning is Melody's coming of age ceremony. This moment of arrival, of having arrived somewhere, and within that moment, it begins in the middle of it. So I don't start it. Melody was coming down the stairs. I started, but that afternoon there was an orchestra playing because I'm very intentional about showing the reader that I'm dropping you into the middle of someone's life, right? And I think that's the case for, we're in the middle of Iris's life when she gets pregnant. We're in the middle of Aubrey's life when he realizes that his girlfriend is pregnant. And so I think it starts at so many different places.
Yeah, and I have to say, I hesitated to use that word begin. I did think about that because it is the event that we move out. It's like a spoke that we move out from or something.
And that impacts everybody in that book.
That impacts everybody, yeah.
And first of all, I love Iris so much. But also, I think a lot of times when people think of young people getting pregnant, they see it as an ending. And I don't. In that case, I wanted to show this was the beginning of something else.
Right. So Iris wants this baby, but then once she becomes a mother, she finds that perhaps it's more than she really wanted to take on. Yeah. So the raising of this child really falls on the father, Aubrey, and her parents as well. But again, this is not a depiction that you often see. You don't see this depiction of a black man as the caretaker so often as you see.
It's interesting. I don't think white folks see it a lot. I think it exists, and I think the narrative is that black men don't take care of their kids, and they do. Yeah. And so in Red at the Bone, again, I was very intentional about showing, this is one of many, many, many black men who do take care of their children, because I think the American narrative is a different story and often a lie when it comes to a lot of stuff about black folks, but black fatherhood in particular.
Well, I think you're right about that. And I think that's why it's important to write that kind of character. Yeah. And so you did do it very intentionally for that reason.
Yeah, and also because I feel like speak truth to power. I feel like it's important. It's a family saga, right? And I wanted to show all the characters and all their roles. I really wanted to paint a full picture of Aubrey and show that he was a loving, fabulous dad, that he was a loving man, that he was a hardworking man, and that for him, fatherhood and family was enough. Yeah. To be able to provide for them. It wasn't enough for Iris, but for Aubrey, he was happy. He was a good guy, and he was happy, and he was a great father. Yeah.
You used you called it a family saga, and that's how I have described it to a lot of people. It's a family saga. But I think when people hear that phrase, they think of a big tome, and this is not that. It's a very slender book, really, but that's because of the way you use language, the spareness of your language. You cut so close to your prose is so much like poetry. Do you think as a poet as you're writing?
Everything I write, I read out loud. So it has to look a certain way on the page and sound a certain way before I move on. And so I'm rewriting a lot, and I'm honing the language a lot, and I'm getting rid of a lot of adjectives to get to the essence of the story. And so, I would say that that's kind of the poetic side of my brain. And it's also what I want. There's an urgency to it, right? There's an urgency to their lives that a lot of adjectives would get in the way of. So I do keep it spare.
Yeah. And I was just amazed at how much you were able to get into this story with this spare language. There's a lot of history here. As you mentioned, the Tulsa Massacre of 1921, which I did not know very much about.
Didn't. Yeah.
Maybe I probably knew nothing about it.
No, a lot of people don't. I think that's an important point. I think okay, raise your hand if you knew about the Tulsa Race Massacre. Oops. Raise your hand if you did not. And y'all know some of you are lying, but it's okay. It's okay.
But how much did you know? Anyway, it's you work this history into this book, into this family saga. Tell us a little bit, for those of us who don't know very much about it. Tell us about it and how it fits into this story.
So Sabi, who is the grandmother who helps raise Melody, the 16-year-old, comes from a family whose wealth was destroyed by the Tulsa Race Massacre, which happened in 1921, where white folks basically came along and destroyed this wealthy black community. And they bombed it. They dropped bombs, they shot up people, they set houses on fire, and the black businesses, they burned them down, and basically ran the Black folks out of town. And I don't know why we don't learn about this in our history classes, but it was one of the many times where Black wealth, or, that aspirational wealth, was cut off at the knee. And so Sabi comes from her mother almost got killed in the Tulsa Race Massacre. And she carries that history and that story into the next generation.
And also, she and her husband create a really kind of an upper class life, really, for themselves when they get to Brooklyn.
Yes.
And maintaining that is very important to her. So when her 15-year-old daughter gets, and that's some of the most beautiful writing, when her 15-year-old daughter gets pregnant, unmarried, she is not happy.
Yeah, it was not the plan. No, she's not happy at all. And she's stunned because she had a narrative, right? She had a plan for who her daughter was going to become and what was going to happen. And here is her daughter saying, I'm going to keep this baby. And also they were Catholic, so there were like so many layers to it. And I think there is where I'm talking about motherhood. I mean, I think we have these plans for our children, and I always think of the Sweet Honey in the Rock song. They come, your children are not your children. They come through you, but they're not of you. And though they are with you, they belong not to you. Yeah. And I think that's so true, especially in that scene where Iris is like, this is me, and this is my baby, and you can't take it away from me. And Sabi is like, what do we do with this?
Yeah. But then Iris, as we've already said, she goes off to college and leaves the baby behind and goes off to have a life. She wants to have the life. A lot of people would say that's a really selfish choice. What do you think?
I went and listened to a lot of people. At one point in the book, she says, I was only 15. I wasn't even anybody yet. And I think that a 16-year-old knows everything they want and very little about what they want. And then they eventually discover it. So at 16, she's still red at the bone. She's still discovering who she is, and her desires are changing. And I have a deep respect for that. I have a deep respect for young people and the way, eventually their frontal lobes connect. But, while that process is going on, they're changing, they're becoming, they're figuring out everything about who they are. And so that's who Iris was. And I think every teenager is selfish. We were all selfish as teenagers, so it made sense to me. And I think the narrative about motherhood is that a mother has to be a certain way. And that's not, I don't believe that. I think there are all kinds of ways to be a mother. And I think in terms of Melody, in the end, she had an amazing life. She had amazing caregivers, and she had people who loved her, and that's what matters.
She had a dad who just adores her, and as you said,
and her grandparents
both. But I mean, as you said, he's willing to. He doesn't care about success, and there's a lot here. Also, he's from
he doesn't care about certain. I mean, he's a successful dad. And he's a successful.
You're right.
And he's a successful mailroom worker, right? And he's a successful family man. So he doesn't care about the same things Iris cares about, and that's the point, that they grow apart, which makes sense because they're 15 when this starts, and they're 16 when they become parents, which is it's kind of mind blowing to me, but I guess not too mind blowing because I wrote the book.
So there's a lot here about class too, which is another thing that I think white America probably doesn't know very much about either, which is the differences in class within the Black community. That and that's another thing that you really explore here that I think is interesting.
Yeah. Why do you think white America doesn't know about?
I don't know, because they don't live with Black people a lot of the time.
Well, we live with white people. We don't live with white people. We know about white class. It's interesting. It is so interesting because I wonder if I don't know how white folks see Black folks, but I wonder, do they just see us all as Black folks? Like,
it depends on where they live, honestly. I think it depends on where they live.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm
going to say that because I live in Washington, and I think that a lot of people in Washington are, depending on where you even live in Washington, you may be more aware of the difference, the class differences.
Yeah.
But that, again, I'm asking you, did you consciously write about that because of the fact that people don't think about that?
about that white people don't think about that.
Okay, that white people don't think about that.
No, I don't think about white people when I'm writing. Like, I really am writing for myself, and I'm not thinking about the white gaze. I think that's a really clear point of my writing, is that I am writing because I love Black people. I really, really love my people. And that's not, and I'm super, super pro-Black, which doesn't mean I'm anti-white, but I believe that our stories matter. And so, and I grew up in a world where my stories weren't there. And my desire is to put those stories there. So the story of the class divides within the Black community is a story that Black folks know, so and it's a conversation we're having with each other about this, that white folks are invited to the party of, and it's a conversation that the Black community is familiar with. Everything from, even Sabi, it was so funny because I was talking to a reporter today, from Austin, and she was asking me about, Sabi always talking about the gold that's hidden away. And she's like, is that a thing? I was like, it's fiction here. And I can't speak for the whole Black community. I don't know if this is a thing. It's not a thing in my house. But for my character, Sabi, yes, it's a thing. But it was so interesting. And I think that, when I was writing it and when I was creating, it created conflict. The economic class thing created conflict. And I'm also trying to talk about generational wealth and why Black folks so often don't have it. And it's not because we haven't tried to pull ourselves up by the bootstraps. But when someone comes along and drops a bomb on your boots, you have no bootstraps anymore to pull yourself up by. And I think that's and so I'm having this conversation and validating it for the people who are, getting victimized and having and feeling lesser than. And in the same way that Aubrey comes from this phenomenal working class poor family and he's brilliant. I think that's another we see again and again in media myth about poor Black people, that they're not bright. And so for me, yes, I'm intentionally putting on the page because I've seen this again and again. I grew up in Bushwick, the old Bushwick, and you throw a stone, you hit 10 Jacqueline Woodsons, right? And I'm the lucky one who was able to write the books and get published and get the awards, but I'm not exceptional, and I think the world will want to look at certain people and say, well, you're exceptional, as a means of saying they're not. And I don't ascribe to that. And so in creating Red at the Bone and in talking about that economic class, I really wanted to be really clear about who these people were and why they mattered.
Mm-hmm. I was reading this book around the time that Toni Morrison died, and I was asked to speak about it, for NPR at a certain point, and so I was reading about her, and one of the things I came across was, first of all, that she said that she had to start writing because she didn't see the books that she wanted to read out there, so she had to write them herself. And then I also read that some critic at the time that when she was starting to write said, there's no white people in your books. I was so struck by that because I see right now so many great Black writers writing about Black life. Colson Whitehead, Jesmond Ward, Ta-Nehisi, Tyree Jones. All these people. And I thought, is that her legacy? Is that partially maybe not only Toni Morrison, but
James Baldwin? I definitely feel like I'm here because Toni Morrison was here, because James Baldwin was here, because Audre Lorde was here. There are so many Black writers and writers of color in general, so that came before me that kind of said, oh, this is okay, go tell that story, whether I met them or not. Alice Walker. And so, I think that's what legacy is, right? Someone comes along and knocks down one bodega door, and then you're able to walk through that one and get to the next one. But she definitely helped other writers inside the publishing worlds to tell their stories.
Yeah. You said earlier, I love Iris so much, the character of Iris. What is it you love about Iris?
I love that she is not thinking about how the world sees her. She's making her own choices. And she's kind of forging ahead no matter what. And I think that's I would love some of that in me in this way. So you create the world on paper that you want to see out in the world. And I feel like in creating Iris, I put every kind of thing that I would love Jacqueline Woodson to be, and except a 15-year-old mom, but a 16-year-old mom. But I just loved her fire.
Yeah. Are you the kind of? I mean, I've talked to a lot of writers now over my career, and everybody has a different approach to writing. It seems to me. But are you the kind of writer who you set out, what each character is going to be? Did you have in mind what these characters were going to be, or do characters reveal themselves to you? I mean, I hear both from writers, and I was wondering, did you have these family figures set out in stone to begin with, or?
No, it's a good question. I didn't. I had an idea of what the story was trying to say, and I had an idea of who Melody and Iris were. And then as I wrote and rewrote, like Aubrey was on the page. I couldn't figure out Kathy Marie for the longest time, like what her role was in the story. I knew who Po' Boy was, kind of, but I didn't know what was going to happen. And, I probably rewrote this book about 30 times. Like, it was a lot of rewriting and reading it out loud and trying to figure out the timing and the way the characters kind of moved around each other and when certain plot points happened. But then it wasn't until I went and wrote that last scene that I came back, that I kind of realized what I was really where I was trying to go with this book. And then a lot more rewriting.
I have to ask you about that last scene. But as I was coming to the end of the book, because as I said, it's a small, it's a slender book, and I was loving it. And then I was thinking, I really kind of don't want this to end, and I don't know how she's going to be able to end this, so I'm going to be satisfied because it was a few pages away. You get a few pages away and think, this book is going to end, and I'm not quite ready for that, And then I have to tell you guys, nails the ending. Absolutely nail the ending. I was like, oh my God, I can't believe she did that. How did you do that?
I knew if I wrote one other word after that last word, it would be because I was being self-conscious about the writing. And so I just knew. I walked away. I was like, there it is. There it is. The ending has literally revealed itself to me. And I knew that I had to go back and figure out other stuff in other parts of the book, but I knew that's where it needed to end. And when you're writing, you're all, and I'm sure the writers in the audience can speak to this, when you're all pensive, pent up and frustrated, and you're not sure what's happening. And then when you get to that point where you exhale and you feel some kind of way, because that book was an emotional journey for me. I mean, I would sit there crying as I'm writing parts of it, or laughing because I thought parts were funny, and then I read them to my kids and they'd be like, that's not funny. But it was definitely like this throughout. And when I got to that ending, I was like, like seriously exhaling.
I'm trying to imagine what that's like for a writer to just suddenly to be writing, and then, I mean, did you know you were going? Is that did you know that's where you were going? We're talking about an ending none of you know. But I'm just trying to say she got to a good place.
I felt really good about it, and it was a very different feeling than when I ended Brown Girl Dreaming, for instance, because that book, I was a mess after that. I thought it was done, but for the longest time, I was like, this book is a mess. No one's ever going to read it. Why am I even writing it? And, my partner Juliet was just like, keep writing, you're going to be fine. And I finished writing it. I'm like, I'm not fine. Like, no one's ever going to read this. And so when I got to the ending of Red at the Bone, it was such a different feeling. Like, I felt very sure of it.
Yeah. Another thing I want to ask you about, I've talked to you about this once before when I interviewed you. Music plays a big role in your writing, and I think that's part of your writing, has a lot of musicality to it, as well as being poetic, and yet you're a prose writer. it plays a pretty funny role in this book. It opens up with this Prince song at this kind of coming out sort of party. And I had to look up the song, I have to tell you. But the lyrics, which are not played.
Her mother won't let her play them.
And can you explain it for...
So, how about I just read it real quick?
Okay.
This is the opening of the book. I had to pay $6,000 for these lyrics. I'm still mad. And if it was going to Prince, I'd be really happy, but it ain't. It's going to his lawyers. But that afternoon, there was an orchestra playing, music filling the brownstone, black fingers pulling violin bows and strumming cellos, dark lips around horns, a small brown girl with pale pink nails on flute. Malcolm's younger brother, his dark skin glistening, blowing somberly into a harmonica. A broad-shouldered woman on harp. From my place on the stairs, I could see through the windows curious white people stopping in front of the building to listen. And as I descended, the music grew softer, the lyrics inside my head becoming a whisper. I knew a girl named Nikki. I guess you could say she was a sex fiend. No vocalist. The little girl didn't know the words. The broad-shouldered woman, having once belted them out loud while showering, was now saved and refused to remember them. Iris wouldn't allow them to be sung, and Malcolm's brother's sweet 7-year-old mouth was full. Still, they moved through my head as though Prince himself were beside me. I met her in a hotel lobby, masturbating with a magazine.
Oh, that's great.
I just love the juxtaposition of this orchestra playing, and that's the song they're playing. And I just did the night before last an event with Toshi Regan at Joe's Pub, and we had a 3-piece ensemble, 2 violins and a cello. And her on guitar, and we played that song. It was great.
But is music in your head as you're writing?
All the time. The minute I start writing, I put my earphones on, and I keep the same playlist for years. Sometimes adding songs in, but that's the way I erase the world. I put my music on. The world is gone. I'm in the world of my character.
But then it has to have some influence on the way you write.
It does. So everything from Eric Garner, Garner, Billie Holiday, Wu-Tang, Prince, all the music in that book is music I added to my playlist to kind of not only hear the music, but to get the rhythm for the book. When you look at Another Brooklyn, I was listening to a lot of jazz because I was trying to get to this jazzy rhythm for the telling of the story. And this was because it spans 1920s to 2000s. I had a whole longer playlist. Janine, I Dream of Lilac Time, most of the songs in that book I listened to get to that place.
Well, I want to leave some time for people to ask questions, but I had one other question for you about being the ambassador for children's literature, which, as I gather, you're not sorry to be.
2 years.
But I just wonder I know you've probably done a lot of traveling with that, met with a lot of young people, and what is your takeaway?
Thousands. So my platform, my motto is reading equals hope times change. And I was going around the country. The groups I chose to talk to were Title I schools, people in Title I schools and juvenile detention centers. And I had hoped to visit them in all 50 states. And what I learned was how many juvenile detention centers exist in each state, so it's impossible. It was impossible for one person. And there's a lot of need, and there are a lot of young people who are so deeply hungry for literature. And there are a lot of book deserts across this country. And I, wonder if that's by accident or design. And that the next ambassador, the next person who comes along or people, have their work cut out for them, but I think it's going to be an easier journey because we're going to make some changes. But it's amazing work, and there are a lot of readers, and there are a lot of kids with a lot of stories.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you, Lynn.
So I want to open the floor to questions.
We have microphones at the end of each aisle.
Oh, there's a microphone right here, and there's one over here.
Okay, shy people. So if you don't ask me the question here, you cannot ask me while I'm signing your book. I know how that goes.
Okay.
I got the book out of the library Thank you. Am I on? A couple of days ago, I started reading it yesterday evening, and I finished when I was sitting here. It had me in tears at the end. But I also have to say, I also read the acknowledgments, which were also ended beautifully.
Thank
And
you.
it was like another at my heart. and really, if I hadn't been sitting here, I would have burst into tears. It was beautiful.
Thank you. Thanks for reading it. Thanks for getting it out of your library, too. I mean, I love independent bookstores and I love libraries.
I was shocked I got it so quickly.
Thank you.
Go ahead, sir.
My question is one that you hear a lot here at book talks, and partly because I tend to ask the question sometimes. Read at the Bone and movies, do you expect, want? Are you already committed to, I ask this anytime I hear a good saga. That's immediately, especially if it's read and if the language makes me see images, then it's sort of an obvious question, am I going to see these images
On the big
as
screen.
images, right? Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know. It's funny because movies and books are so different. Like the writing and the creating is a very visual experience for me.
Right.
I can definitely see the characters moving along the throughout the story. But I don't think about film. I mean, my film agent thinks about film, and I let her do that. But I don't actively try to get something on the screen because for me it's so deeply satisfying to do the book.
Right, okay.
Have you had anything made into a film?
Miracles Boys was made into a miniseries, and I am actually writing Behind You into a series, which I had never of all the books, I had never thought that was the book that would become a series. But I think that's it. I might be missing something.
A lot of writers are disappointed, of course, when their books are turned into films and TV shows.
Yeah. I would join that circle of people. Thank
Anybody else?
you.
We got another question here.
Hi.
Oh wait, I know we got somebody. in the
Thank
mic.
you.
I am always curious to know whenever there's an author that I love what they're reading, and so what are you excited about? Sort of reading in terms of whether writers of color or what's new and exciting you're looking forward
On
to?
Earth, We're Briefly Gorgeous blew me away. Ta-Nehisi's new book, The Water Dancer. I talk about exhaling because he wrote he writes nonfiction and he's a friend, so I was like, oh, please let this book be good. Please let this book be good. And it's phenomenal. I just started Ann Patchett's The Dutch House, which is really great. I'm usually reading more than one book at a time. And I can't remember what else I'm reading. I think I'm rereading the Black Panther comics because I just like them. So
Thank you.
thank you.
Great. Go ahead.
Hi.
Hey.
External from your work in Title I schools, I'm interested to know how many people of color actually interview you and what your experience is also with interacting with queer people in the literary community and what their reactions have been to the spaces that you're in and how much you like or dislike the people who you interact with. 'Cause, just kind of how many queer people of color do you actually interact with in the literary scene, and how has that impacted what you write and how you feel in your career steps?
That's a great question. It's so funny. I think about all the fluid people I know without going like this. I think that my world is mostly queer because I'm queer. So, but in terms of like who interviews me, I get a lot of interviews by Black women, not always queer women, and some women. I'm trying to think. I don't know. It's so funny because it's just, for me, it just kind of ebbs and flows. In terms of who's asking me what, but I don't know. It's such a good question. In terms of interacting with queer writers, there are lots of us, and we're a small group. We tend to gravitate toward each other. I feel like back in the 90s, it would be when there was conferences like Outright and places where queer writers could gather and talk about stuff. There was a lot more of that. But as the world changed, we got separated from each other, and so it's kind of like when I'm sitting talking to Ocean or something. it feels like home in a very different way. But I keep my circle, I keep my people close. And that's and some of them are writers, a lot of them are artists, many of them are queer, and that's because when I go out into the world, so often that's not the world I go out into, and it's important for me to hold home close.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, I'm almost done with Last Summer with Maisel
Uh-huh.
and The Two Best Friends.
Mm-hmm.
I've read Brown Girl Dreaming sometime before that. And somewhere in between, you talked about your friend a few doors down from you.
Maria.
Yeah, Maria. And how you guys were best friends. How is that what inspired you to make Last Summer with Maisel?
Definitely. That's a great question. Yeah, Last Summer with Mason actually took place on the block I grew up on, Madison Street. And Mason isn't, I feel like I'm both Mason and Margaret in this way, but my friendship with Maria, who I'm still very good friends with, was definitely inspired that friendship. The people in the neighborhood that I knew as a kid definitely inspired people like Miss Dell and Margaret's mother. So yeah, there's a lot of me in that book, and I think that's because it was my first novel. So it was I was writing what I knew, and of course, Brown Girl Dreaming is a memoir, so that's a lot of me.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thanks so much. I haven't read the book.
That's okay.
I grew up in Harlem on Sugar Hill.
Mm-hmm.
Had a lot of friends in Brooklyn.
Mm-hmm.
I want to ask you something about the nature of Black people who see colorism.
Mm-hmm.
Black, light,
Mm-hmm.
light. As Langston Hughes says, there's a kind of category for all of us that we have in ourselves. Have you written about that or talked about it or been asked about it?
No, because I don't care. You know, I think there's so.
I just meant a commentary.
Oh no, yeah, no. It's not something. I feel like when I'm sitting down to write, I'm writing from this place of love for my people, and not of a place of, I feel like of all the things I can critique in the community, that's not one I care enough about to go deep into. And I live in I have my family. If you saw my family, you'd be like, "What are those?" Like it's such a family that spans so many shades and so many ethnicities and so many languages that I never want anyone in the family to feel lesser than. And so to even begin to write and have people call each other out around that, it feels so remedial to me in this way that I'm not interested. So I've never written about it. Thank you.
So you mentioned that you rewrote this particular book like 30 times. So this kind of a process question about, but how long did it actually take you to write the book is one question. And also, you also said you read a lot of different books at one time, but are you ever writing more than one piece at the same time?
I'm usually working on 2 or 3 books at the same time. And not necessarily in the same genre. So if I'm writing middle grade, I'm also working on a picture book and maybe an adult book. Or right now I'm working on an article for the New York Times, and I'm working on the screenplay, and I'm working on a middle grade book. And that's what slows me down. But then when I'm really, really into a book, that's the only thing I can work on. So it gets to the point where I have to just focus on that one book. And in terms of Red at the Bone, I feel like it started in 2015. Okay. And I've always been interested in the Tulsa Race Massacre and the absence of it in a narrative, and especially in our daily narratives and in our historical narratives. So I knew I was going to write about that some way, somehow. And also the the stereotypes around teenage pregnancy. I that was on my brain. And when I always say I write because I have questions, not because I have answers. And I kept saying, what if, and what does this mean? And also in terms going back to thinking about generational wealth and often the lack thereof in Black communities, I really wanted to speak to that and understand that on a deeper level. And that's when I started with Red at the Bone. But it started in different stages. And I always take notes and I'm writing down character sketches and
Did you
stuff.
know it was going to be the same book? Like you're just.
Yes. Yeah, I do know that those notes
Okay.
are going toward that book.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm a middle school teacher, and
Thank you.
we are we are planning to use After Tupac and D. Foster as well as Brown Gourd Dreaming this year. And I just had a parent reach out to me last week that she would rather her son not read After Tupac and D. Foster because she was so fixated on the subplot with one of the girls' brother being wrongfully imprisoned that her son could not relate to that, and she didn't want him to read that book. So I have drafted and redrafted my response, and now I want to do a Jacqueline Woodson unit. So
she was upset about the brother being in prison, not that the brother was queer and in prison.
She didn't mention the issue, any concern about the brother being queer, just that she didn't want her son reading about gangs and imprisonment. And
there are no gangs in that book.
I know. So I was wondering, like, did we even read the same book? Did you even read the book? Because we have to have parents read the books that we plan to use in our classrooms. So I still haven't replied to that email. And I guess, but really my question is, I think it's so important for us to bring lots of different books into the classroom for the kids, especially for the kids who are used to reading books about themselves, right? Are used to seeing themselves and don't even realize that. And I guess I should expect that there's going to be, this pushback. And so I was just wondering if you had any advice or words of encouragement, or will you just come to our school?
I don't know if you've noticed, but she does speak her mind.
Yeah.
I know. Let's talk about start from the letter A. So I'm stumbling, but I think, of course, if the kid knows his mom is saying don't read that book, he's already finished it.
Right. Right.
But so you're reading it as a class read.
So we're going to offer that as an option along with Ghost as well
Ghost
as
is
The Skin I'm In.
Ghost is fabulous.
And as well as Mockingbird. So they'll have 4 choices.
Mockingbird.
Catherine Erskine.
I don't know.
And then Ghost, and then The Skin I'm In, and then After Tupac and D. Foster. And so the idea, the focus of the unit is on identity. And also we want the students writing a narrative and using the book that they're reading for inspiration, looking at the author's writing style. And so that's how we plan to use it.
That I love that you're giving them so many options, and I think that's really important. I don't even respond. He doesn't have to read it. What's going to happen is hopefully he'll read Ghost, which is phenomenal, right? And then the kids will be talking about it and loving it, and he'll want to read it. So, and that's not you putting it into his hands.
Yeah.
That's so much of that happens by word of mouth from people their own age. So I wouldn't even respond to her. Just, keep on moving. There's so many times in this world where you just have to push past and keep on moving.
Thank you.
So, thank you.
That made me think of something, though, because we're heading into Banned Book Week, which happens every year. And have you had any trouble
Oh my goodness, have I not? I was talking about this in that New York Times piece when I remember Judy Blume calling me up and saying she's doing this anthology called The Places That I've Never Meant to Be, about people whose work has been challenged. And I'm like, well, my work hasn't been challenged. She's like, oh, yes, it has. And a lot of times when your work gets challenged, you don't even know, right? Because it's not like they're calling you up saying, I'm taking your book out of my classroom, or I don't want my son or daughter reading your book. So of course, other people know more than you do about it. And so, yeah, my work has been challenged.
But you don't respond. I mean, we don't know about it necessarily. But have you ever had to?
Some
respond
people know
in
about
any
it.
way?
I remember when Scholastic was first publishing From the Notebooks of Melanin Sun, which was their first queer book ever. And excuse me, I did an interview in Out Magazine, and they talked about that book. That book wasn't even published yet, that this was a book Scholastic was publishing. And I got all these letters from sixth graders somewhere in Washington State, like handwritten letters where the teacher had an assignment to write to say why this book shouldn't be published. And it was like, we don't want Jacqueline Woodson, an African-American woman, to write a book about a lesbian mother and her, and there were so many misspelled words. And I mean, African-American was and it was about 30 letters. I went through each one and corrected all and sent them right back. I was so mad. So I just went through it with a purple pen because I don't like red pens. And I just returned them to them. But, that was when I was in my 20s. Now I just ignore it. But back then.
Any other questions? No.
We have time for one more question, or if everybody is ready, we can move to the signing.
Yeah. I really am not answering them while I'm signing. I'm so serious.
Okay, we got one.
Okay, I couldn't resist. I was struck by you saying that you wanted to write about the Tulsa massacre because it was something that we didn't know. I've really been struck by so many African American writers of fiction. I think fiction tells a truth that nonfiction can't, and journalism doesn't want to address. And I'm wondering what you think about the kind of fiction that's being written, particularly by writers of color. I mean, I'm struck. I just was sitting there thinking about, Tiara Jones'
An American Marriage
is about, the
wrongful
incarceration. Attica Locke writes about white supremacy, even The Hate You Give. They're all books that I thrust upon people because I want to say, no, you have to read this because maybe then this will be your entryway
Exactly.
into trying to find out about these other things. I'm wondering what sort of books you've been struck by. Clearly, your book you want people to know about real things that you write fiction. I'm wondering other books that you.
When I think of something like Jessamine Ward's Sing Unburied Sing, and of course. Tiari's book and Ta-Nehisi's and Colson, and I think what strikes me about them is they're speaking truth, and they're also telling amazing stories. So they're really beautifully written. There is that entryway that makes it easier on the heart, right? To be able to fall in love with these characters and care deeply for them and want to see the world changed because of that. And so I think that reading builds empathy, it builds understanding, as Dr. Rudine Sims Bishop talks about, in keeping with the need to cite Black women, because we often don't get cited. We just have our quotes thrown around the world and not get credit for them. But in keeping with that, she talked about the importance of young people having mirrors and windows. So mirrors so that they see reflections of themselves, and windows so that they see into other possibilities and other worlds and other narratives. And I think that what good fiction does is it really does give us a window into those worlds and makes the lives of those people and makes us understand them on a deeper level. And so it builds empathy. So I think the lesson I learned from writing for kids is that you can't be didactic. That the minute you're didactic, someone's going to stop reading your book, especially young people. They write because they want to hear a good story. They don't write because they want to learn. They read textbooks to learn. And so, and I bring that to the adult writing. Like, there are things I want to say, there are questions I want to ask, there are conversations I want to have on the page. And I don't want it to feel like I'm trying to teach somebody something, because I'm not. I'm writing to learn myself. So I feel like from Sing Unburied Sing, even from The Water Dancer, I just felt like I learned so much about the Underground Railroad, about the lives of people who came before me. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thanks
Lynn.
so much. It was great talking to you.
Always so fabulous talking.